Mark, welcome to Pull Up a Chair. As the chair of Mace, an organisation that has over 7,000 people, revenues of $2.5 billion, with ambitions to be $3 billion within the next 2 to 3 years. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's a fast-growing business. What does sustainable growth mean to you?
Well, firstly, thanks for the opportunity. What it really means to us is really threefold. One is how do we create a business which is, has the resilience to cope with the ups and downs that anything gets thrown at us. The geopolitical, pandemics, banking crisis, the lot. So that is fundamentally what's important to us about having that longevity of a business. We won the Service Excellence Awards a few years ago, and that was really based on having a vision that takes us much into 2030. And that was really on the back of how we worked and learnt from the banking sector. The second part, which we find is really important to us, is like everyone, is the supporting the growth of people's careers and making sure that we create fantastic opportunities for the people coming to the business. And then thirdly, which has really become more obvious to us over the last 5 years, but actually a journey we started back in 2012, which is about how to become a sustainable business, recognising the green agenda and really taking that forward. And it really propelled itself after the pandemic for us. So we saw many of our clients stepping up and really wanted to make a difference. Although we've been doing it 5 years in earnest before that. So we put our first sustainability strategy in place in 2017 called Steps Without Footprints. So it made a big impact to the business. And more importantly, then every year we held ourselves to account how we were performing against that and shared that openly with the industry. So we didn't just look at it from our own perspective, we shared that with the industry. And I think that's one of the real benefits of, a bit like health and safety in our industry, sustainability, driving the green agenda has become that same collaborative cohesion for the whole wider industry.
It's interesting you talk about cohesion and collaboration because all industries are trying to grapple with how they balance the needs of the people, planet and profit. And there is a fine balance. And the construction industry in particular, I think cement's something like the second most used resource after water. So do you think, or given what you've just talked about in terms of steps without footprint, how is the construction industry sort of facing into that balance of people, planet and profit?
Well, if you look at the overall built environment, 40% of carbon emissions come from the built environment. So one of the biggest emitters, and that's not just in the embodied carbon within the facilities that we create, buildings, infrastructure that we create, it's actually in the operational use as well. So things like decarbonising the grid has a huge impact on decarbonising the built environment. Cement, it would be larger than many countries in terms of carbon emission. So tackling cement and developing low concrete cement is going to be one of those big factors in the future, and that's going to take a number of years. So part of the work we've been doing is working with cement manufacturers to develop a number of products like low carbon concrete cassettes, working with some of our clients who are using reinforcement steel, driving green steel, which is made through energy efficient sources. And another one that's going to be big for us is transport. A lot of our materials are transported to site. So if we can minimise that through using different techniques, but again, decarbonising transport is going to be another big game changer for us. So there's several aspects in there that we're constantly looking at, and we're sharing that information again as an industry-wide initiative.
And what strikes me from those examples you've given me is the interconnectivity with other industries. I mean, transport isn't something you can solve alone.
No.
You need the work, and even cement, you need to work with cement manufacturers. So the Construct Zero project has established sort of a pathway for some of that, for the industry to hit sort of the net zero targets. Well, maybe for the audience, explain what that the project is, but also how you're collaborating with government to really affect what I call a system-wide change.
Yeah. So this stuff, the origins of Construct Zero, that is a CLC initiative. It was developed shortly after the pandemic, and it was really based around 3 themes: transport, work methods, and products. And what we try to look at is how we bring those together with all three, not just ourselves. And it goes back to the CCC client sixth climate commitments about hitting those targets. So we're looking at in a holistic environment of saying, what is the government, firstly, what is COP saying, what effectively are what government's saying, what are we doing as a nation, and then what we're doing as an industry. We took a lot of learning from the Jet Zero team and said, which is aviation.
Yeah.
And we took a lot of initiatives from them. But actually, we have the Green Building Council, supporting us within the construction leadership team as well, and driving their initiatives as well. So it's bringing together many ideas. So whether we look at how do we measure, measurement is easy. So as soon as you start measuring, we've seen a 30% improvement just in 4 years, just through saying we're going to measure the embedded carbon per metre squared of a building. So if you take a commercial office, for example, it used to be nearly 1,000 tonnes of carbon per metre squared. We're now driving below 500 tonnes just through measurement and saying, how do we do things differently? The next 30% are going to be developed through products and the way we deliver things. And then the final, the big change will be decarbonisation of the grid.
The data that you've just shared, is that for the industry as a whole? And so are organisations within the industry holding themselves up to those aspirations or ambitions?
Yeah, they have different targets. So commercial will have different targets to infrastructure. It will have to repair, maintenance and improvement.
Yeah.
So repair, maintenance, improvement will be really driven by manufacturers and transport, whereas how we deliver more of the complex buildings is going to be delivered by manufacturers, constructors, designers, who are having far more influence in the process.
Yeah.
So that's really where you just got to differentiate between the two. Construction and infrastructure are very similar, but RMI is different. Housing is different again.
Yeah.
The solutions for housing are slightly different. So the construction is really made up of what we call 4 sectors: housing, infrastructure, construction, repair, maintenance, improvement. And the final one we really never really talk about is the manufacturers and distributors have a huge impact on it.
Absolutely. And that's where the collaboration piece comes
absolutely.
in. Just on that, on the Construction Leadership Council, for our audience, would you mind just sort of sharing a little bit about the scope of the work that you lead and how you're really driving change?
The role of the CLC is very much to convene the industry, bring the industry together. As we've evolved, I think we did a fantastic piece of work supporting the industry during COVID particularly. That's where we really made our name and brand. And that was coming up with site operating procedures, how people could work, how we could get the industry back up and running, how we got the support from government. But since then, since my co-chair, I've been really asking the team to focus on 4 key things. Building safety, recognising the challenges for the industry for Grenfell. We then look at net zero carbon and biodiversity, people and skills. And then the final one is a bit of a catch-all, but it's important for us. It's what we call next generation delivery, which is about digitalising the industry. And then how do we make sure that we've got fair business models? So they're really sort of it's quite broad. And there are working groups and industry leaders and sponsors, and all this is free of charge. No one gets paid to do any of this. We are supported brilliantly by DBT, Department of Business and Trade. And we also have established some industry working groups. So the industry working groups being housing, buildings and places, which is infrastructure, and then finally repair, maintenance and improvement. So they all have different requirements and they have different performance, different criteria, different challenges.
And that's a fantastic example of how you're breaking down the challenges of organisations, whether it's net zero, it's skills, and actually coming back to the heart of what you said earlier on, which is the resilience of the industry. And part of that is the sustainability. So, Mark, you talked about the breadth of skills that you have in your organisation, but more importantly, the opportunities that you offer, whether it's a grad or whether it's an apprentice, whether it's a mature worker. And one of the things you said earlier on was about, helping people build great careers and keeping them. How would you describe the culture at Mace? What keeps people there?
Well, we have a phrase we use is pursue a better way. And our purpose, developed by our people, was to redefine the boundaries of ambition. And it's really interesting when you develop a purpose within an organisation. We started off talking about many things. We were going through a phase where we said we wanted to redefine a business. How would we want to take the business forward? And that redefine became one of those key words. We've always talked about ambition and to grow and change and develop and become something far more than we were previously. And it was our teams who then turned around and said, we're not showing enough ambition in our purpose. So, we have a culture of can-do, we think. We'd like to think that's a can-do attitude. We have become far more collaborative. One of the benefits we get from both being a consultant and a constructor is that we are delivery focused. So we are a delivery focused organisation. And when I read our customer surveys back, one of the things that comes across loud and clear is we get things done. And unashamedly, we will say we're a delivery consultant. And people say, what's that mean? Well, we're not just going to pass paper around.
Yeah.
We're going to get things done. And that sometimes means doing things beyond our scope, which we often do. But more importantly, it's about having a culture of can do, always want to be better, driving ambition. And that point around creating opportunity is really important, of how people can move around the business. So how we create global opportunities for people who, I have one of our graduates who've been with us a number of years. I challenged him, he wasn't actually pushing himself hard enough. And he was managed a small part of a construction project. Now he's managing 2 huge towers in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It's just amazing when you see that. And it's just giving those people opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to quote something you've said before. Unless we radically rethink how we build, we will never be able to deliver the housing and infrastructure that's desperately needed across the UK while reducing our carbon footprint. And I think most people listening to that will recognise and understand where that's coming from. Could you maybe share a little bit about how what you're doing at Mace?
So I in 2016 was probably one of those moments when you stand up as I was then a chief executive and said, we're going to build residential towers 1 floor a week. And I've got an audience looking at me saying, he's got to be barking mad. What is this guy talking about? We collaborated with an organisation from Australia. We developed a technique of how you could actually build residential towers at 1 floor a week. And then we trialled it, demonstrated it. It won an innovation project in 2018. And since then, we've honed it. We're now on version 6. But the real thing is people in our sector don't believe it can happen until they see it and touch it. And people in our sector don't want to buy it until they've seen someone else do it and it works. And because generally most construction projects are research projects, at the heart of what they're doing, they're a first of a kind. Developing those platforms to become first of a kind are quite challenging and take time. Now, we have a whole team dedicated to being able to build towers effectively. And, if you go to a project down in London by London Bridge, we've achieved that 37-storey tower, 1 floor a week. The team now tell me how we do it. And that's the excitement I get, is when the team now tell me about something I suggested them 8 years ago that couldn't be done.
Isn't that interesting?
It's great.
It's fascinating because you talk about, you're right. The way that you push the boundaries is by doing things that are the first of its kind, especially with some of the challenges we've talked about. Are there any particular projects at Mace that you're particularly excited about with that sort of first of a kind sustainability lens?
Well, I think if you go back to, again, I've been in Mace nearly 30 years, so I've had lots of interesting roles and experiences. People always say to me, "What's your best and what's your worst project?" I was involved with London 2012. I would say that was my worst project and my best project. But that was the London 2012 Olympics. Yeah. From a sustainability perspective, I think that still leads the way in what people are trying to do. Equally, from a biodiversity and an innovation, nothing to do with me, but universities were engaged to look at, making sure the grasses bloomed at a certain time during the Olympics. That was the level of detail we went to. And, credit to the sustainability team that did that. If you then move on about what other projects, the Shard was going on at the time, that transformed our business of doing a project, tallest building in the UK. If you look more recently, Battersea Power Station.
Oh, yeah.
Another huge project, 2.5 million square feet. You know, that's regenerated a whole area.
Yeah.
If you go further abroad, if you look at work done in Dubai, you know, Expo 2020 is a huge project, but it's creating those cities of the future. And that's really what excites me going forward, is about how do we create those cities of the future. Exciting.
Cities of the future. And you're right, I know Battersea Power Station was an iconic building, and now it has regenerated that whole area and created a whole community and hub of activity. Moving on a little bit in terms of the need and the demands around construction. So the Labour government has pledged to deliver 1.5 million homes during its first term, and a series of new towns of 10,000 or more homes. So that's quite a sizable town.
Yeah.
The Construction Industry Training Board estimates something like 250,000 new construction workers are required, when that's not just tradesmen, that's also professional services. And we need that by 2028. I mean, we're talking about a really short time frame, and that would only deliver the current need, not the forecast need. What do you think can be done to, one, attract people into the industry, to fill those 250,000 jobs plus, and what priorities do you think, you know, business and government could focus on to really nurture that workforce? What is it that we need to do to really make sure that they do succeed?
Yeah, so let's just start with the first thing. When I first got involved with Construction Leadership Council, I led the People and Skills Group, so you've got me on safe ground here. The second part of that is that 250,000 is a rolling programme we've looked at the CITB do every year. So they do that survey every year. And it broadly hasn't changed much. It's gone from 240 to 270. The real issue that actually isn't in those figures is the impact of green jobs. And that could add another 80 to 120,000 people.
On top of that 250?
On top of that 250.
Wow, okay.
So again, this is a huge opportunity for the industry. You know, it's a well-paid, second best paid industry in the UK. And, you know, employs 9% of the workforce. It really hasn't grown much in the last 5 years. So the numbers, 2.1 million, 2.2 million people employed in the sector, hasn't grown much. So there's two things that we've really got to do. Obviously, it's about focusing on attracting and making the industry appealing. But actually, believe it or not, our biggest risk is actually people leaving the industry in their first few years. So, you know, generally, we lose in our sector around about 50% of the people who start as apprenticeships. So what we really need to do work on is how do we maintain them through their training, through their development, developing the skills and competency and getting qualified. So once you demonstrate that, then we can help those. We really need a lot more stability from government in that process. So the 1.5 million target is a great target in the term.
Yeah.
Personally, I would prefer that have been 4 million over 10 years, because it's going to take us time to ramp up. So a few things that we are already putting in place with government. There are training hubs around the country.
Yeah.
We have been working through some other parts. I work with the government team, again through the CLC, on a thing called Construction Skills Delivery Group. That looks at how we can actually have flexible apprenticeship programs, what we can do with the levy. One of the things the levy should be used is to help some of the apprenticeships with their travelling, because the burden of moving around the country is quite high. Thinking about some of the fiscal policies that are in place to help people in those areas. So we're trying to look at those policy interventions. One of the other things we put in place is boot camps. Again, they're short-term training programs. People need a base knowledge of skills.
Yeah.
But actually, if you're a trained electrician, you wouldn't need a lot more to be a solar panel fixer commissioner. You don't need 10 years of training. You need 4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Take your word for it.
Yeah, no, you know, it's not extensive.
Yeah.
Half it's in the methodology rather than the actual technical solution. So there's a number of things that we need. So we need to create modular programs that say you have a base understanding, and then you can build into these modular programs and upskill people quicker, more efficiently, drive the competency and the retention. Retention's a huge issue, but it's also a confidence piece for employers. Everyone talks about attraction. Like other industries, we're not in the same place of healthcare or hospitality. We are an industry where we've got lots of people who want to join. It's actually how do we absorb them and keep them employed and get them trained through the process. And it has to be a collaboration between government and industry.
Wow. You touched on sort of the modular training and green jobs, which actually brings me on to the next sort of topic I wanted to pick up on. And it's also one of the 4 or 5 things you talked about the CLC's focuses was next generation digital, right? But I'm going to be very specific. I want to go down to AI because I'm intrigued as to how industries are adopting or embracing AI. I don't know if you're able to share a few sort of examples of how you see generative AI, one, being used, but number 2, how it will continue to evolve.
Yeah. So there is not a client I don't meet today who doesn't ask me what we're doing about AI, which is fortunate because we actually are doing quite a lot in that area. But you have to have a clear base to get the maximum out of AI. Now, and the other thing we're always very concerned about is the cybersecurity around AI. So I think that the two have to be dealt with in parallel. You don't look at AI standalone. Very much is about what's in our controlled environment. So what's within our environment is the things that we are putting our efforts into. Fortunately, we've invested the best part of about £100 million in our digital platforms since 2018. So that's creating an enterprise platform, it's creating data and knowledge hubs. We've began work about 18 months ago about structuring all of our data. So what are our asset types? And now that gives us the platform suddenly to then move very quickly into AI. We didn't know we were doing that for AI when we were doing it, but we now, over the past 12 months, we worked that out. And, organizations like Microsoft have been fantastic helping us. The next stage we're going to is obviously using Copilot, rolling Copilot out as an initiative through about 15% of our senior workforce so they can actually begin to use those tools. And then it's developing bespoke Copilots. So for our business, we're looking at bidding at the moment. Then we're looking through all the various disciplines to look at how we re-engineer the process and then how we then use that data and knowledge much more quickly. So the things that we can do is compress our programs, particularly at the front end. If we can make the front end, the pre-construction phase, as we call it, much shorter by building on the data and assets already there. And it's amazing that I can just play with Copilot today in our business and it pulls up reports. And you think this has saved me so much time, and it's pulling out the best practice report. So it's the best of the best. And I haven't got a hunt on Mark Reynolds' knowledge or someone else's. It's Mace knowledge. That's really powerful in its own right. But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
What we really want to do is re-engineer, and we're setting targets for ourselves to improve by 30% by 2030. And I have the same thing with the pre-assembly work. Is that that's ridiculous, how are we going to achieve it? We will achieve it. I don't know, Mark Reynolds won't achieve it. Most people will achieve it. And if you take that wider opportunity forward for the industry, there is a massive opportunity to digitise and use AI for the planning system. You wouldn't believe how much people spend on major programs surveying the site. If we all had a proper digital twin that was trusted, and it was an open source data, therefore we wouldn't spend months surveying, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds on survey costs. We'd have that to our fingertips and we could trust it and we could use it. There obviously are the security aspects to that, so we have to bear those in mind. So is that balance between how do we use AI and how do you have security protocols?
But it's clear there's lots of opportunity for efficiency, but also to be better. People need to invest to grow. And we often talk about value, we talk about ROI. But to deliver sustainable investment and sustainable growth, you need to invest for the longer term. And I'm talking about not just 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And as the construction industry, a lot of your clients are thinking that as well. How has Mace embedded that sort of long-term thinking into your decision making? How have you embedded that sort of, it's not always about the next 3-4 years. How do you kind of think about long term and bring it into your decisions?
So as a private company, that makes it a little bit easier because we don't have to. We work with private organisations who then became public, and then walk in the office next day, they were looking at their TV screens, looking at their share price. We don't have that problem. So when we make investment decisions, that was by our executive board at the time. We said, no, we're going to do this, and there isn't a debate. When we want to do it, we make a decision as a team and owners. We signed it off and we'll get on and do it. And our leap of faith, whether it's digital is a prime example, when we committed to do the investment for Oracle, our ERP system, that was a £35 million investment. Has that paid off? We think so. Will it pay off in the future? Almost certainly. Now we were able to harness that data and really use it to benefit our business and make us far more efficient. That was effectively, we knew that was a 10-year commitment. When you think about where you are longer term, is what type of business do we want to be in the future? So we recognise as an organisation that and one of the reasons that my role has transitioned is that bringing in an independent board to make sure that they are challenging us in a different way, and we've got that level of governance in place, is really important to us in the future, such that Mace exists in the next 20, 30, 100 years, hopefully.
Yeah, and on that, in terms of independent board, you have, having spent quite a large chunk of your career at Mace and having latterly led it as chief executive, you've now transitioned into an exec chair role. And I'd just be interested to see how that is different for you now that your role is slightly different and you're thinking of in a slightly different horizon.
So first of all, I was fortunate or unfortunate, whatever way you'll describe it, is I went through that process with my previous chief exec. So Stephen Pycroft was our chairman and chief exec for several years. We had a planned transition. We've gone through far more major transition in the business. So effectively three and four individuals changing their roles over a period of what was seen to the business 6 months, but actually for us was 24 months. So it was a 24-month plan executed over